Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Steve, very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to start by saying that I'm an enthusiast of the Jerusalem Post, and I am so glad to be able to come to a conference where so many ideas are discussed. My wife Marie is with me here today. It's her birthday this weekend. I just wanted to recognize her. But let me just say, on our committee, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, what we have been able to do with the hearings that we have put forward, with the evidence that we bring forward, is to unite our committee for, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One was my recent legislation on sanctions against Hezbollah, which we passed with large bipartisan majorities. I only wish, and we put together, myself and Elliot Engel, and we worked together on these initiatives, right? Elliot worked with me to pass this legislation that would give the Ayatollah a choice between economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program several years ago. It was widely reported in the Jerusalem Post and the New York Times. I only wish, after we had passed that with such a decisive vote, that the administration had not blocked it in the United States Senate. Because I think after 30-some hearings, 30 hearings on this problem, I can tell you at the end of the day, we have not changed the attitude in Iran. When you hear the chants of death to America, death to Israel, when you notice that the focus is on America as the great Satan. Israel's only the little Satan in this equation. America is the great Satan for the Ayatollah, if you've heard any of his recent speeches. And I would suggest to you that all of us have a responsibility to work together to educate better and inform better people not only in the United States but around the world as to the true challenges involved. I would also share with you that we have passed legislation through the committee to improve Israel's qualitative military edge. We are working right now to pass legislation to assist on this MOU and make certain that inside that MOU is the support that Israel will need for missile defense systems. And I will say to you this: the American public support a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. So does the Congress of the United States. But we need to get more information in front of the public. And I'm just going to give you a story by way of an example of what I've learned as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was asked a couple of years ago, 2013, myself and Elliot Engel, we had taken a bipartisan delegation to Israel. I insist that Republicans and Democrats travel together and learn together. And in this meeting, I think we had maybe a half dozen in the delegation, 7 members. We were meeting with Abbas, the special envoy, had asked us to meet with President Abbas. And after the pleasantries were over, I asked him a question, because I had heard a translation 2 months before of a speech in which he had again denied the Holocaust. And I had photographs that my father had taken at Dachau, and I handed him the photographs, and I asked him if he still denied the existence of the Holocaust. And he said, well, regardless of what happened then, it's no excuse for what's happening now. And I said, well, that's why I want to talk to you. Because what is happening now, the incitement, the rhetoric that you are using now, is so reminiscent of the incitement used in the 1930s. Something caused the Holocaust. Something created a situation in which 6 million people lost their lives. 6 million Jews lost their lives. And my question is why that language would be used by you today if the goal is to create coexistence between the Jewish people and the Palestinian people. And in the middle of this discussion we were having, I looked over his shoulder and I saw a map. And I said, by the way, President Abbas, where is Israel on your map? He said, where's your map? Show me your map. I think the point is that in order to create a climate of peace, we really have to have leaders in this world that rather than push incitement, are having a genuine dialogue. And my question, because when the discussion was over, and of course, Elliot Engel did a magnificent job of arguing this point, and Nita Lowy asked, why are you poisoning the minds of the children, of the next generation? And by the way, when we went back, we worked on legislation together in order to have the leverage to cut back that support, cut back that aid, in order to use that, in order to demand that incitement stop in the textbooks. But here's my question, because when we walked out, our special envoy said, you know, the meetings don't usually go like that. And I asked, why not? If you're not pushing on these themes, how can it be that for 20 years we have been funding the Palestinian Authority? How can it be that those are the broadcasts, and this broadcast, the particular one, was on an Iranian-owned station that was done into Lebanon? How can it be that he's doing those broadcasts? How can it be that this is in the textbook? Why haven't we used our considerable leverage? And the commitment that I think the members of the House had was to try to change the direction of this. But we have to have the American public understand the challenge here. And you play a major role in that. The BDS movement, as Elliot and I have gone on campuses in order to try to speak to the student body and explain the complexities of the Middle East policy. But when people aren't hearing the other half of the story, and when I say not hearing the other half of the story, in 2006, when the missiles were slamming into Israel, I went up to Haifa. My wife was in Jerusalem. I left her in Jerusalem. I went up to Haifa, and we took time to interview those who were in the trauma hospital. 600 victims there. And I was trying to get the media to tell their side of the story. Because what the media was concentrating on was the counter battery fire as Israel tried to silence those rockets and missiles, and the story about, you know, those Hezbollah families who had a rocket launcher in their backyard and now were collateral damage. And what I wanted was balance in that story. And I remember having this discussion with a reporter from the BBC. And I remember her saying, no, I know, but I called my editor when you suggested that, and he said that would not be balanced. I said, come down to Haifa, come down to the Rambam Trauma Hospital. There are Arab Israelis, there's Jewish Israelis, there's Druze Israelis, they're all victims. Interview whoever you want, but tell that part of the story. When I called my wife about this, she said, take a plastic bag and put that shrapnel, put those ball bearings in it. Go on television and do a little bit of guerrilla theater to get the point across, and they'll cover it. They'll have to cover it. And we did that on CNN and on other stations, on Fox and so forth. But we have got to get out there, my friends, and tell the story about what is going on in terms of this incitement. That's one thing the Jerusalem Post does. The wider story that we have to remind people, and I've had 31 hearings now on this issue of Iran, the wider story is the support out of Iran that goes into the assistance to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Hamas, to overthrowing our allies in Yemen, to putting Quds forces on the border in Syria, on the border with Israel, on the threat that we read about in the Wall Street Journal, where they're attempting to transfer the technology, the GPS capability, into the hands of Hezbollah. I can tell you that that would be a game changer, and we have to prevent that. That agreement was supposed to guarantee, and I was a critic, I led the fight against it, but it was supposed to guarantee no transfer for 6 years 5 years and 8 years on the missiles and on this conventional weapon capability. And here we are today with the administration saying, well, at the 11th hour up at the United Nations, instead of going through Congress, we had to agree to a change. And that change changed the words from Iran shall not to the words Iran shall be called upon not to. And now the Ayatollah is pointing to that, and he is saying that's why we can go forward with our ICBM program. That's why we can launch these tests with the words Israel must be destroyed, not only in Farsi, but also in Hebrew on the side of the This is their argument. And this is why we must be more engaged in having people follow the details of what's going on in these negotiations. And I can add one other point to this. We have to be very careful, based upon my experience and my discussions with President Abbas, that we do not end up at the United Nations with an agreement in which there is not a demand for security. My concern is that the administration might, instead of allowing this to be negotiated between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, might allow this French authored initiative to go forward, recognizing a Palestinian state, no security guarantees for Israel, and all of a sudden, we are dealing in a situation where we can see the incitement on a daily basis of people calling upon youth to go out and commit attacks against Jews. My father said one thing to me that I've always tried to keep in mind. He said this after he heard a speech translated from the Ayatollah. And what he said was, when somebody says that they're going to kill 6 million Jews, in the 1930s, there might have been some excuse to believe that that was an exaggeration. Before we went into those camps, there might have been some excuse. But after what happened in the Holocaust, there is no excuse for us not accepting the word of anybody on this planet who says death to Israel, and by the way, let's add death to the United States. If that's their message, and that's their intention, and we watch them proliferate weapons and Quds forces and try to overthrow governments in the region, what do we think is going to happen if we don't stand up to this? So have your sons and daughters, nieces and nephews on the campuses, get out there and support the effort to educate people, get them involved with respect to this BDS movement on the campuses. And lastly, just remember this, every spending bill originates in the House of Representatives. So as we work with this MOU, we are going to make certain that our ally, who developed at probably 10% what it would have cost us in terms of the Iron Dome, that, by the way, is now used by the U.S. and our allies, including in Korea. That's used all over the planet, except that we would not have developed it, my friends. You know why? Because we didn't think it was possible to hit a bullet with a bullet that way. But because of the ingenuity in Israel, they did. They developed it. It was effective. And I just will add one more point. When people tell you about the disproportionate use of force in order to stop Hamas, we sat down, we actually had testified before a committee, American generals and an admiral who had gone over there to witness that. And they said it was amazing that the United States probably could not have conducted operations under the constrained rules that Israel was trying to use in order to minimize. Now here's what Elliot Engel and I saw. We went into those tunnels, and the tunnel we were in came up underneath a school. It was clear to us that the intention of Hamas was to capture those children and try to take them into Gaza and to make the IDF fight block by block by block to get them free. That is the reality. By the way, we went back with this evidence, passed a resolution in solidarity with Israel off the floor of the House and condemning the use of human shields by Hamas. But I just share with you, that's the challenge ahead. So let's get the information out, and thank you, Jerusalem Post, for the invitation here for me to speak today.